This is our last lecture on Pentecostal preaching. One of the problems I found out is that a lot of pastors do not know where do you start to build a sermon, neither do they know how to use the library. And so in this lecture, I want to show you how we build a sermon right from the start. And so I am directing the students I am teaching on to do research, and then they will go to come back and report to me, and we'll build a sermon together. There are some steps, 9 steps I suggest in building a sermon. The first thing you need to do is to re-experience the text. That is, you must let the Lord speak to you and make the scripture that you are preaching from to come alive. The second thing is that you need to find the purpose of the passage, or the main thought of the passage. This would give you an idea where what the passage is talking about. A third thing is that you need, right in the beginning of your outline, in the introduction, to state where you are going in your sermon. That is called the purpose statement. And so there are 3 purpose statements. That is to inform, to persuade, and to motivate. And so we will be talking about the healing of the woman that had a problem with bleeding. And so the purpose of this sermon is to motivate people to trust God for their healing. And so we'll put it right in our introduction for our own benefit. Fourth thing we'll do is try to find the blocks of thoughts in the sermon. Blocks of thoughts is the moves or the main ideas in the scripture we are reading from. Then we want you to look at the translation of this passage by translating it from the Greek, if you know Greek. But if you don't know Greek, you probably could look at various translations and get a pretty good idea of how this verse and what the problem is, and what is the best reading and understanding of this passage. A 7th thing that we want you to do is to find the symbolic meaning. For symbolic, I mean is, for example, in the story of blind Bartimaeus, he was not only physically blind, but he was spiritually blind. And by spiritually blind, we mean that's the symbol. We draw that out from the text. And so you need to draw out in narrative preaching right from the text the symbolic meaning, and that would add to your sermon. We call that the secondary meaning. Then we want you to look at other people's sermons, how they outline this sermon. And then we want you to look at commentaries. Look at 2 types of commentaries: practical commentaries, and one I would suggest is Barclay's commentary, which is very, very good and very inexpensive. And the other one is an exegetical type of commentary, such as Word Biblical Commentary. And when you're looking at these commentaries, we want you to look at the historical background. We want you to look at the customs. We want you to look at anything that has to do with geographical location that will explain the text. And so now I am sending the students to the library to report on their findings, and they will bring back their findings to our class, at which time we'll build a sermon together on Mark 5:24 through 34.
You have to pay everyone because we are giving you much knowledge. That's a lot. Who has it right now?
Yeah, I recommend it.
We are continuing our lecture on trying to put together a sermon, and the students have gone to the library and done research, and we are looking, as I said, to Mark 5:24 through 34, and everybody has researched an area, and we are going to take it from there and see what the students have to say. Now, the first thing we'd like to know is how you made out. Fine? Good stuff. Now, most people believe that Pentecostal preaching is preaching under inspiration. There is no preparation. But as I said last week, Pentecostal preaching also takes in perspiration. And so it is intellectually and emotionally stimulating, spiritually and emotionally. And so we must reflect that in our preaching. And I am not suggesting that God does not use what we have. That is, if we don't have any training, we don't have any books and things of that sort. God uses whatever we have to make available to Him. Probably one of the reasons Paul became one of the major contributors to the New Testament writing is because he was literate and was able to articulate the church's teachings and correspond to the churches, and he was the most literate of all, and has handed down to us what we do have today and consider Scripture. Now, so what I am going to do, we're going to move through step by step on trying to build a sermon. So the first step is, what is this story about? And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. And a certain woman, which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind, and touched his garment. And she said, If I may touch his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, Who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me? And he looked around about to see her that had done this thing. And the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague. In Pentecostal preaching, the first thing we have been suggesting is that you need to re-experience the text. Now, it is very difficult to re-experience the text in a short period of time. I think Bird's method lends itself more to a shorter period of time in a classroom setting. And so the person that re-experienced the text tell us what the Lord impressed upon you in this text, and what are the important truths highlight for us the many things and then round it up by the most important point.
We need to step out in faith for God to heal us.
The main idea of the passage is all about Jesus heals a woman with a hemorrhagic problem. Or we can say it another way, a woman with a hemorrhagic problem for 12 years is completely healed by Jesus.
Okay, let's then go to the board and begin to walk through this process. What would you say we could call the sermon? What might be a good topic? Jesus heals a woman with a hemorrhaging problem? Okay. Okay. The text is what?
Mark 5.
Mark 5, 24 to what? 34. Introduction. Okay. Who had to come up with the purpose statement? Anybody? Now, as you remember, there are two ways to tell a narrative. I am suggesting you spend 5 minutes telling the story first. 5 to 8 minutes, tell the story all over again in your own words. Tell the story. Then the purpose statement. Right. So what do we want to do? Do we want to inform the audience that Jesus healed? We want to persuade, that is, to influence them that Jesus heals, or we want to motivate them so that they could come up for healing right away? What do we want to do? Okay, so how do we say it? This is, so I want to motivate my audience that Jesus heals. Okay. Now, do you tell people what your purpose statement is when you're preaching? No need. No need. Because already, if you notice, we're talking about Jesus healing with a hemorrhaging problem. People already know what we're talking about, right? Okay. Now, what about the person who had to get the blocks of thoughts?
First of all, is the part that the woman's sickness gave her much suffering and pain. Her faith in Jesus healed her from her suffering and sickness. The power of Jesus freed her from her suffering.
Now, before we get into the outlining of the passage, we want to hear from those who did the exegesis.
The Greek suggests she was sick for a long time, and her healing was both physical and spiritual.
Let's get to the person who looked at various translations and tell us what you found.
Okay, I looked at least 8 translations, namely King James Version, Living Bible, Phillips Modern English Version, Revised Standard Version, Today's English Version, NIV, Jerusalem Bible, and New English Bible.
All the different translations seem to say that she was sick for a long time, both physically and spiritually.
Okay, now let's get the symbolic meaning. Who had the symbolic meaning of the text? The first point is what?
The bleeding,
What does it symbolize?
it symbolizes bandage or
What else? What else? Those who have studied the scripture and drawing from Old Testament law, what happens when a woman
unclean. She is
she
considered
is unclean?
Yeah.
So she is an unclean woman in comparison to who? Leprous, a prostitute. So she was in the bottom of the ladder. She was untouchable at this time, and that is probably why she had to sneak in the crowd.
Yeah.
She could have been stoned.
She was not supposed to be in that crowd.
Right. So bleeding also represents a social outcast, a leper,
A curse. It
A
symbolizes curse.
Okay.
Touching.
So-
It is a symbol of faith.
Touching
Yeah.
is a symbol of faith, but not only that, what is touching also does.
It
You have-
moves the heart of God.
Yeah.
Touching.
But let's talk about touching generally. Anybody have children? Yeah? What does touching do? Communicate.
Love and care.
Yes.
Thirdly, she was healed not only physically, but she was healed spiritually. And that is the healing here means physical and spiritual. So she was totally healed. She was now called daughter. The term that suggests that she was now part of the family of God.
The commentaries affirm what was already shared. She was a social outcast, and women don't usually speak in the public, but Jesus permitted her to speak.
In summary then, in what we have done, this is what it looks like now. The topic is Jesus heals a woman with a bleeding problem. Mark 5:24 to 34. And in the introduction, you should tell the story of how this woman came to meet Jesus. 5 minutes, a little more than 5 minutes. The purpose statement is what you want to accomplish. I want to influence people to trust God for their healing. And that's what we said in the class. The second point is that the woman's sickness. The symbolic meaning here is that she, in essence, was a social outcast because she probably she was classified among lepers. She was classified among prostitutes. She probably, if she was married, couldn't sleep with her husband. And so this woman was a desperate woman. So we are looking at the symbolic meaning, and the symbolic meaning here, she was a social outcast. The second major point is her faith contributed in healing her. It was not only Jesus' virtue going out of him, but she made a step of faith. She touched Jesus. And today, the symbolic meaning is we can touch Jesus through prayer. And we could touch Jesus by someone praying for us. And then we have another symbolic meaning is the crowd. The crowd could be friends and family around us that hinders us from touching Jesus. And then the third point is the power of Jesus healed her, both physically but spiritually also. He called her daughter, and she became a child of God. And so, in conclusion then, what we are saying is we are rereading our purpose statement, and we are saying, Jesus heals today. Let me say a few words about application and illustration. You should be most concerned about application. If you would tell the story, bring out the points, use the symbolic meaning of the text, and apply it, it will get to the hearts of people. And so in doing that, you are communicating with the audience, and you could begin to use I feel her pain, we can feel her pain, probably you can feel her pain. how she was a social outcast. So you're moving from I to you, and in your preaching, you are addressing the audience then. Now, an illustration illustrates the point, but what you don't want to do is that you want to get an illustration for each major point. What you want to do is you want to illustrate the major point that you're trying to communicate. And in this case, we want to mention that we can trust God for healing. So in your illustration, you want to show, whatever you say in your illustration, that Jesus heals today. And it reaffirms your purpose statement. It reaffirms what you're trying to say. It reaffirms the direction you're trying to go. And it really ties the sermon together. Now, if you cannot find a good illustration, I would suggest you leave it out completely. This is my outline and how I deal with this sermon. First of all, I call this sermon, Jesus Heals a Woman with a Bleeding or Hemorrhaging Problem. The text is Mark 5:24 through 34. My purpose statement is I want to inform my audience that Jesus heals. So I'm not moving for a particular action. I just want to inform my audience. I have 5 points. The first point is the woman had to come to the end of herself. And that is what we see. She tried all the doctors and everything, and now she comes to the end of herself. Secondly, she heard about Jesus, probably from friends or others, but she heard about Jesus. And although she was not allowed in crowds because she was considered a leper or in the category of prostitutes, she went into the crowd and sneaked in and probably creeped under. That's the third point. She touched Jesus' clothing by faith, and she just believed by touching Jesus she could be healed. And then the fourth point is Jesus recognized her faith and declared her healed. He declared her that she was now a child of God. She was not only healed by faith, but she was not only healed physically, but she was healed spiritually. And what I am trying to say here, I'm reading back my purpose statement, and in my purpose statement, I am saying I'm here to remind you that Jesus is still in the healing business, and we can reach out and touch him now.
I have not said anything about library and what you should get. When I was doing some work at Westminster Theological Seminary, the professor of New Testament suggested 2 excellent tools that are not very expensive. The Greek-English Lexicon of the New Testament by J.P. Lowell and E.A. Nida. They are the editors, and it is produced by the United Bible Society. It's a 2-volume text, and translators use it all around the world. And this can, in a lot of times, take the place of a lot of commentaries, because it gives you the best meaning of what a word or text might mean in any particular culture. And the next thing that I would like to suggest is the 26 translations of the New Testament put on by Zonovan Publishing House. And if it's out of print, probably you could use various translations when you are looking at a passage of scripture. Thank you very much.